Yo guys, my name is Blue. I'm a professional programmer who likes to make games and content in his free time. I just released my game Super RPS on Steam. This was the first game I ever fully made by myself. I previously worked on a platformer called Blocks about 5 years ago with my cousin Richter. I felt like I learned quite a lot in just making these two games. Obviously, there's been a lot of other prototype games that I've made along the way, but I feel like this experience will be helpful for anyone who's looking to either release a game or just wanting to learn more about indie development. So I thought I'd make a video on it, and we could kind of talk about the process of how I made Super RPS. First things first, the idea for the game. At a high level, it's just rock, paper, scissors. And then you put superpowers on it. So instead of just making rock, paper, scissors, we wanted to throw a little bit of a twist on it and make it so that the existing win conditions would be a little bit different. For example, one of the power-ups in the game is called Rock++, and basically the match that ends up happening on that field, Rock can beat both paper and scissors. So the original idea for this actually came from when I was watching an anime called Kaiji. Basically, it's Squid Games before Squid Games. The characters are attempting to gamble large sums of money to get rid of some debt. In one of the arcs, they play a game called Restricted Rock, Paper, Scissors. Each player is handed a deck of 12 rock, paper, scissors cards, and the goal is to get rid of them. There's some additional caveats that happen in the anime. Players can lend money, they try to basically pay each other off to get their cards. Basically, hijinks ensue. However, this kind of led to the conception of the idea in my head. Instead of just normal rock, paper, scissors, what if we gave players some sort of home field advantage? Hence the concept of field cards, the superpowers that I mentioned earlier. Part of this was also inspired by Bakugan. Yes, the old kids' toy anime. In it, you would throw a little spherical ball thing on a field card, and that field card would give an advantage to the player that played it, giving each player the opportunity to kind of tilt the match in their favor and add a second layer of dimensionality to the game. From there, I took the concept to paper, I drew out what the UI and the rules of the game would look like. And then obviously here I kind of did a rough sketch of the UI, kind of trying to see where the pieces would fit, what potential power-ups we could have, generally how the game was meant to be played. So one of the first things you have to decide when making a game is what engine you're going to program in, what language you're going to program in. For me, I've been kind of a Godot ride or die since 2019 when I originally built a school project in Godot, and I have a lot of experience making prototypes in Godot. I try to follow general best coding practices, obviously object-oriented programming, turning the fields and cards into objects. The big issue when we were getting done with the alpha build was multiplayer. I had done some basic TCP, UDP type programming in Java when I was in school. I still barely know what either of those things mean. And for me, it was the most daunting task in this entire project. I struggled a lot with using pre-built Godot network projects. There was a bunch of starters on GitHub trying to use networking. It took me a while. I finally arrived at what I needed to, which was Godot Steam by Gramps. Basically a framework for connecting to the Steam API via Godot. A lot of people use this for achievements, as technically did I for this game, but we rely heavily on this built-in Steam peer-to-peer networking to send packets between players. Using add-ons in Godot, this was super easy to implement. Then, once the game was in a playable state, not even remotely polished, I literally drew the art in Microsoft Paint. But once it was playable, I took it to a handful of homies and asked them what they thought of the game and just asked for some general feedback. This group that I approached ranged from gamers, artists, programmers, so I got a pretty wide gambit of feedback. A few of the big things that I took away from this was, in my original plan, we actually had 9 fields. 3 would be owned by each player, and 3 would be randomized by the CPU. I also prepared a second mode that was just 3 fields, 1 owned by each player, and then in the middle, owned by the computer. And overall, the feedback I received confirmed the 2 thoughts I had lingering in the back of my head. The 9 was just too complicated, especially for new players. It just felt like they were already trying to get familiar with the different fields, and just throwing so many in front of them made it so much more confusing. Along with that, the 3 fields, which I actually thought was a better way to play the game, felt too easy for players. Now that might be because they played on the 9 fields originally and then switched to the 3 fields, and so they felt like it was a little bit easier. But in general, the conversations that I was having, it just felt like there wasn't enough happening in those. So the solution I took away from this, 5 fields, 2 per player, 1 in the middle that's randomized. Not only did this fix the complicated problem, it also made the game less RNG based. There was less RNG because the CPU wouldn't be deciding so many matches. The second big problem I noticed was with the wager system. Originally, the game had a full-on wager feature where players would wager points on each field and try to win by a larger margin. So for example, let's say I owned a field, I put 5 points on it because I knew the field was in my favor and the opponent puts 2. That way, if I won, I would walk away with 7. This added a third dimension on top of the strategy between the rock, paper, scissors and the fields, but it ended up becoming extremely confusing in practice, and it also felt a little bit redundant because people would just end up putting the same amount of wagers on every single card The ones you owned would get more. The ones that were randomized would get the minimum amount. So I decided to remove the feature entirely and focus just on winning the field. And then it was the point of the project that every single game seems to hit. The large, unexpected break. From starting the game to running the alpha, it was about 2 full months of working on the game in the background. Overall, programming the base game didn't even take that long. Most of the actual programming was spent learning and debugging the multiplayer aspect that I touched on. However, after the playtest, I had a list of features that I knew I needed to implement. I think this is where a lot of games fail. I genuinely just lost all motivation to work on the game. I kept telling myself I'd get back to it soon, but then everything else in my life just started taking priority. Ultimately, this gap ended up taking over a year. I don't fully remember what motivated me to restart, but I imagine that had something to do with me wanting to make another game or having another game idea. Luckily though, the time in between wasn't completely wasted. It gave me a lot of time to think more on the concepts, including abandoning the wager system that we talked about. Finally, when I returned to making the game a year later, Godot 4 had fully released, so my first big task was just to update the entire project. I made this originally in Godot 3.3, which was outdated at the time I started it. We upgraded all the way up to Godot 4, and it included an entire revamp of Godot Steam and the documentation. Not only did this fix a lot of the issues that I had in the alpha test where some of the packets were getting sent out of order, it added some functionality that we needed to the project. Then the big task of clearing up the field behavior for all the stuff that we thought about during the alpha testing, removing the wager system, reducing the number of fields. And in this year gap, I was still coding, so my skills were getting better, and I look back a lot, I spent a lot of time just refactoring a bunch of stuff that I don't know why I really implemented in the way that I did. Along with all of the bug fixes, code polishing that took place, I also needed to start looking at the art, so I started having conversations with my boy Spartan Cat about the general art direction and the steps I could take to spice up the game. That's where the comic style came from. The comic panels for the fields, the buttons, the background, just in general how I could try and spruce it up to give you guys a little bit more depth in the actual art of the game. Then it was time to hit up my boy Moza to turn my concepts into reality. Like, this was my original plan for the logo, and this is what Moza turned it into. And then the beta continued. We polished up the game, adding a menu, settings, setting up the fonts. And then I feel like the game was basically at a point where I would say it's 95% done. Once we got to that point, I decided now would be a great time to get some more testing with the same group of people as well as some additional homies. Luckily, this time we didn't have any big changes that people wanted. There wasn't anything that was breaking the game. We had some small bugs that we ran into that were easy to fix, but there were some other things with the UX, just making it easier for new players to kind of figure out how to play the game. Armed with these results, I hit another break. This time way shorter, just 2 weeks, just for the holidays. But I was super motivated to get the game finished up. I added achievements, threw in some music, courtesy of Audio Reserve on Fiverr, added some sound effects, fixed the bugs, created some Steam assets, built up the store page, and we were ready to go for release. Conceptually, I knew this game was a bit simple, and realistically, without a story mode, I didn't really see players wanting to spend money on this game. The alpha test confirmed my suspicions, so I kind of rolled with that concept in mind. Realistically, I knew more than anything, I wanted to make a good game that people could play, especially for my stream homies that I'd come to meet during my time streaming on Twitch. So all the costs with this game are sunk costs, just for the sake of transparency. But I feel like as someone wanting to get into dev, this is one of the most important things that people are going to be curious about. One thing I will say is I'm going to exclude the amount of money I spent on art because I had a homie discount from my boy Moza, and I'm not trying to ruin my future runs by putting him on blast, so that part is going to stay hidden. However, for music, I have 3 tracks, each of them cost $75, so around $225 for all 3 of them. Along with that, I also bought Ableton and a MIDI keyboard because I originally intended to make the music myself, and I thought it would be a good investment for future games. So, you know, maybe count it for this project, don't count it for this project, but that was another $200 for those 2 things. Finally, the cost of Steam submission, which is around $100. So for all those things combined, minus the art, I spent roughly $525 making the game. Marketing. One huge factor in releasing a game is marketing it well. We tried a lot of things when we released blocks, and honestly, I didn't really feel like doing all of those again. And on top of that, since I'm not actually going to be making any profits with this game, I didn't want to sink more money into like promoting it. So basically, my main source of marketing this game are these YouTube videos, my homies that I made through my streaming journey playing this game, getting the word out basically. My hope is you guys will like the game, you guys will go play it, you guys will tell your friends, they'll want to play it, Again, I'm not going to be making any money on this game. There's no ads. There's nothing for me to really gain here except for an audience. And for the sake of transparency, that is my end goal here. I want to create an audience that I can sell my games to at some point. That was part of the reason we made this game free. I just want as many people to play it, as many people as we can try and get into the community. So if you're interested in either seeing any future games that I make, or just joining a fantastic community of gamers, artists, etc., check out the Discord. It's in the description. And then one final note before I sign off here. Advice for new game devs. I'm going to keep this section short because honestly, I don't really have any crazy life-changing advice I can drop. I'm not a successful game dev by any measure. I'm just trying to make some games. However, I do have some experience, and I have had a bunch of people come to me and ask already about how they should get started and what they should look into. So all I'm going to say is this. If you have an idea, whether it's a game, a book, a movie, whatever it is, start working on it now. Stop waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike and all the planets to align just for you to try and make something. Obviously, there's so many other things that come into it. You want art, you want music. And sure, you can do those things yourself, but you feel like you might not be up to par. Regardless, start taking those steps now and start making progress towards making that thing. You'll progress so much more from a failed project than sitting on an idea for the rest of your life. And who knows, you might meet some awesome friends along the way. Like I said, this game is just one step in my journey of making games. I have a whole list of ideas and games I want to make, so at some point they will be coming, but unlike making a YouTube video or starting a stream, there's a huge time cost associated with it. Some of these are going to take years to even get out, but I'll do my best to keep putting out some games you guys can enjoy. But ultimately, I'd like for you guys to join me on this game dev journey. Finally, I have some ideas that we can turn some profit from Super RPS as well. I know we said we're not going to have any ads or anything of the sort in the actual game, but I do have some ideas for some merch and stuff. But that's more so if the game is any bit successful. If you guys are interested in all at keeping up with the journey, or simply joining a community full of amazing artists, streamers, gamers, and the like, be sure to join my Discord at the top of the description. Other than that, go check out Super RPS, guys. I learned a lot making it. I hope you guys have some fun playing it. Any feedback, constructive criticism, likes, dislikes, go drop a review. I'd very much appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for the support on this journey, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Till then, much love. Peace, peace.